My name is Melissa Carter. I'm 31 years old and I still can't fully process what happened that evening. I had spent weeks preparing for my mother's birthday. I wanted everything to be perfect. I poured my heart into every detail, from the fresh lilies at the entrance to the soft string quartet playing in the corner of the hall. The lighting was warm and golden, the food catered from her favorite French bistro, and every napkin folded just the way she liked. Small details that no one but me would have noticed, but I didn't care. It was for her. It was supposed to be a beautiful night, a celebration not just of her birthday but of our family, our connection. Or so I thought. Over 30 guests were seated at long tables draped in ivory linens. Familiar faces, polite smiles, small conversations floating around like harmless bubbles. My mother was radiant that night, laughing gently with her friends, sipping white wine, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear the way she always did when she felt truly at ease. I remember watching her and thinking, finally she's happy. I didn't see it coming. The moment itself felt unreal, like something out of a badly written family drama. One second I was near the dessert table making sure the raspberry tart was set in the center like I'd planned, and the next, my father's voice echoed through the hall, cold and loud, cutting through the laughter like broken glass. Pay us $2,200 for living under our roof, or pack your things and don't come back. Every conversation stopped. Chairs creaked. Glasses froze mid-air. My hands tightened around the edge of the tablecloth as I turned slowly toward him. My father, tall, serious, always so private, was standing beside his seat, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed not with anger but something colder. Finality. His words had weight not just in volume but in intention. He wanted them to hear. Everyone. Then Derek, my older brother, smirked like he was enjoying a private joke. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed lazily, and muttered just loud enough, "Good luck, kid." It wasn't the first time Derek had taken pleasure in my humiliation. That smug, knowing grin, he wore it often like a badge of superiority. Growing up with him meant knowing how to shrink when he entered the room, how to brace yourself for some cruel jab wrapped in sarcasm. He was always the golden child and I was tolerated. I looked around the room and in that moment I saw everything. My aunt hiding her face behind her glass, my cousin pretending to check her phone, one of Mom's friends mouthing "oh my God" to another. But no one said a word. No one stood up. No one asked what the hell was going on. They just watched like I was some tragic spectacle they hadn't paid to see but were too entertained to turn away from. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I thought I'd panic, cry, plead maybe. But no. Something settled in my chest, heavy and final. I looked at my father, then at Derek, and then I simply stood. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask why. I didn't try to explain myself. What would be the point? They'd chosen this moment, this day, to humiliate me in front of everyone. There was no miscommunication, no misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I straightened the hem of my dress, picked up my bag from under the table and walked out. I could feel the eyes on my back like 1,000 pinpricks, but I didn't look back. Not once. Out in the cold air, the music was still audible through the glass doors. The laughter resumed eventually, I'm sure. The party went on without me. Of course it did. But I stood in the parking lot, staring at the night sky, wondering how a celebration I'd orchestrated with so much love could turn into a public execution of my dignity. Not a single text came that night. No calls. Not from my mother, not even a whisper from someone who was there. As if I had disappeared with the wind and no one even noticed I'd been part of the evening at all. I drove back to the apartment I'd been crashing at, barely furnished, shared with 2 college students who never cleaned the sink, and sat on the edge of the mattress I called my bed. My dress still smelled faintly of perfume and wine, and I couldn't bring myself to change out of it. I just sat there, quiet, hollow, trying to make sense of the unraveling. But nothing made sense. Not then. What no one knew, not my parents, not Derek, not even my closest friends, was that months before that disastrous evening, I had already put a plan in motion, a plan I called my quiet escape. I had spent years putting money aside in a private savings account, a little here and there, birthday bonuses, freelance gigs, small reimbursements no one asked about, even cash back from groceries and work trips, all carefully tucked away under layers of anonymity. Every deposit brought me one step closer to a future I hadn't dared to speak aloud, and when the right house appeared in a quiet suburb outside Providence, Rhode Island, I didn't hesitate. I signed the paperwork in silence, wired the down payment, and accepted the keys alone, standing in the front yard of a 2-bedroom house with chipped shutters, ivy curling along the fence, and a front porch that creaked in the wind like it was welcoming me home. That house was mine. Completely mine. Not a soul knew. It became my secret, my anchor, the one thing I could cling to while smiling through dinners filled with passive aggression and walking on eggshells around people who expected me to be useful, invisible, and grateful for crumbs. I didn't tell anyone about the weekends I'd spent driving there to scrub the floors, tear down old wallpaper, repaint the walls in soft colors that reminded me of safety, or the long nights I'd slept on a rolled-up blanket in the living room, planning out where furniture would go and what books would line the shelves. So that night, after I walked out of the party with nothing but my purse and my dignity, I didn't return to the house I'd been crashing in. I didn't stop by the family home either. I drove for an hour and 40 minutes, headlights tracing the darkened highway, silence sitting heavy around me like a second skin, until I pulled up to my new driveway. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just walked inside, locked the door behind me and sat on the bare floor, back pressed against the wall, knees to my chest. And for the first time in years I exhaled without fear. That night marked the end of something, and the beginning of something else. I wasn't just leaving the family home, I was severing everything they thought they controlled. They didn't know that for years I had been the one managing certain financial accounts under the illusion of helping out, while they played the victims of hard times. I handled their bills, their credit cards, set up their banking passwords, made sense of the mess they created with loans and forgotten payments. At first it was because I wanted to help. Then it became expected. Then demanded. I was their safety net, their invisible accountant, their emotional punching bag. But now, sitting on my own floor, surrounded by silence and peeling paint, I knew what had to be done. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I wasn't going to keep paying for the roof they threw over my head like it was a gift and not a leash. I wasn't going to maintain the illusion of a family that protected me when they just stripped me bare in front of strangers. I opened my laptop, connected to the internet, and began the process of untangling my life from theirs. I canceled the joint utilities I was still inexplicably paying for. Gas, internet, electricity. I removed myself as co-signer from Derek's car insurance. I changed every password, closed old shared accounts, flagged every subscription that was still hitting my card. But I didn't stop there. For months I had suspected something deeper, something that scratched at the back of my mind late at night when I couldn't sleep. Numbers didn't add up, credit cards were maxed out with purchases no one claimed, bank statements arrived with charges I didn't recognize. I had access to just enough of their financial data to know that something wasn't right, but never enough to prove it. Till now. With calm, deliberate hands, I opened the folders I'd created quietly on my desktop over the past year, filled with screenshots, emails, bank records, and dates. Every transaction that looked like money siphoned, every questionable loan application, every debt listed in my name without my knowledge. I saw them all now. I wasn't imagining it. They had used me. My name, my credit, my steady income, all of it had been twisted into a financial web that had kept them comfortable and me trapped. By the time the sun rose, I had drafted letters to credit bureaus, compiled evidence for fraudulent activity, and scheduled appointments with legal aid services. I wasn't just walking away from the family that betrayed me, I was reclaiming what was mine, piece by piece, document by document. There was a strange calm in the process, like dismantling a house you didn't realize was on fire until you stepped outside and saw how black the smoke had been all along. I made coffee in a chipped mug I'd brought with me from the old place and stood barefoot in my empty kitchen, watching the light stream through the small window above the sink. No one had ever stood here before me. No one had washed dishes in this sink, leaned on this counter, cried on this floor. This space was untouched by their expectations, their voices, their judgment. And it belonged only to me. For as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of my brother. Derek was the golden boy from the moment he could form a sentence, and I was the quiet one who was told to wait her turn, to be patient, to understand that boys need more encouragement, or that he's just going through a lot right now. It didn't matter what I did, how hard I tried, or how much I achieved, he was always the star and I was the flickering light in the background, barely visible, barely heard. When Derek turned 16, he woke up to a brand new car parked in the driveway with a red ribbon stretched across the windshield, like something out of a TV commercial. Our parents called neighbors over, took pictures, grilled steaks in the backyard, and gave him a celebration that felt like the coronation of a prince. He drove off that afternoon with the windows down and music blasting, and I watched from the upstairs window, clutching a half-finished homework assignment, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. When I turned 16, I got a driving manual secondhand with notes scribbled in the margins, and a warning to be careful not to rack up too many miles on the family's old sedan, which I was allowed to borrow only for important errands. When I won the national mathematics competition in high school, something no one in our district had done before, I came home carrying the plaque in my backpack, my cheeks still warm from the applause of strangers. I opened the front door to silence. No balloons. No cake. No one waiting in the living room with congratulations or even curiosity. My mother was folding laundry, my father was on a call, and Derek, who hadn't even asked why I missed school that week, was watching TV in his usual spot on the couch. I pulled the plaque out and showed it to my mom. She glanced at it for less than a second and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to a pile of shirts that weren't even mine. I held on to that plaque for years, keeping it tucked away in a box under my bed, not because it made me feel proud, but because it reminded me that even when no one else saw me, I had accomplished something real. I learned early on not to expect more than a passing nod for anything I did. Straight as, well, of course. You've always been good with books. An internship I fought tooth and nail to get? Is that even paid? Promotions, certificates, scholarships. It was all met with the same bland acknowledgement, as if I had merely done what was expected of me and nothing more. Meanwhile, Derek's every movement was treated like a victory. He got hired at a local tech firm once, an entry-level job he barely qualified for, thanks to some vague referral from a friend of our father's, and the living room turned into a party hall that night. Mom baked his favorite pie, Dad opened a bottle of wine, and relatives were called to share the good news. There were toasts, speeches, even a slideshow of childhood photos someone had put together. I sat in the corner of the couch that night, hands folded, smiling when I was supposed to, laughing at jokes that didn't include me, feeling like a guest in my own house. It wasn't that I needed praise. I didn't crave a spotlight. I just wanted to be seen. To be acknowledged with the same enthusiasm they offered Derek for simply existing. Instead, I grew up learning to shrink myself so I wouldn't make others uncomfortable with my ambition. I learned to celebrate alone, to cry quietly, to turn moments of pride into private victories that I folded away like old letters no one wanted to read. Even when I moved out briefly for college and paid my way through on scholarships and part-time jobs, it wasn't treated as an accomplishment. It was expected. I once overheard my mother telling her friend, "Melissa's always been the responsible one. She doesn't need much from us," as if my independence was a reason to withhold affection rather than a trait to admire. Over the years, the pattern became so routine that I stopped sharing milestones altogether. There was no point. Every time I mentioned something I was proud of, it was met with polite disinterest or quickly redirected toward something Derek had said, done, or needed. Conversations at the dinner table revolved around him. His frustrations, his plans, his girlfriends, his boss. When I spoke, it felt like I was interrupting. I learned to retreat into silence, where it was safer, less disappointing. That silence over time turned into distance. I stopped showing up to every family gathering, choosing instead to preserve the little energy I had left. I declined calls when I knew they'd be about Derek's latest endeavor or when I sensed I'd once again be asked to step in and help out without acknowledgement. And yet, despite how invisible they made me feel, I still tried. I still organized birthdays. I still helped with bills. I still kept hoping, foolishly, that one day they would see me, not just as the one who handled everything in the background but as a person worth celebrating. That hope finally died the night of my mother's birthday, when they chose the one event I had poured myself into, not for myself but for them, as the stage for my public humiliation. That was the moment everything came into sharp focus. The years of quiet dismissal, the emotional coldness, the invisible weight I had carried, they were no longer things I could explain away or forgive. They were deliberate, chronic choices. I was never the daughter they wanted to celebrate. I was the one they used and overlooked year after year. And I was done pretending otherwise. I had handled every single detail of the celebration with the kind of care most people reserve for their own weddings. The floral arrangements had to be fresh and arranged exactly like the photo I had saved months ago. The table settings were hand-selected, matched by tone and texture, ivory and pale rose, soft candles flickering low to create warmth. I spent days negotiating with the caterer to get a custom menu my mother would love. No shellfish, extra vegetarian options, her favorite wine chilled exactly right. The invitations had been printed on cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, delivered personally, not emailed, not texted, because I wanted everything to feel real, intentional, elegant. And yet when I arrived that day, no one seemed to notice. I walked in carrying extra boxes of supplies and last-minute decorations, and no one turned their head, no one said, "You did all this?" or "Thank you." I wasn't greeted, not even with a smile. My mother, standing at the center of the room in a new dress I had bought for her and secretly placed in her closet weeks before, looked past me like I was just another vendor arriving late. She didn't recognize the scent of her favorite flowers or the subtle choice of music playing in the background, the jazz playlist I'd made of songs from her college years. If she did, she didn't say anything. When it came time to seat the guests, I noticed immediately that my name card had been placed at the very edge of the hall, near the side exit where the catering staff moved in and out. I thought it had to be a mistake, that someone had switched it by accident, but when I quietly tried to mention it to my father, he waved me off with a distracted, "Just sit where your name is, Melissa." There was no chair for me at the family table, no space left among the people I had grown up with, people I had known my entire life. I sat down beside the swinging door, close enough to smell the food before it reached the guests, far enough away that I could barely hear the toasts. Throughout the evening, several guests referred to me by the wrong name. Marissa, Melinda, even the girl who did the lights. One woman handed me her coat and asked where she could find the restroom. I didn't correct her. I took the coat and pointed her down the hall. At one point someone asked if I was part of the catering team. I laughed quietly and told them no, but they were already walking away apologizing but not really listening. It would have been laughable if it hadn't felt so familiar, so heavy. I had spent my life blending into the walls of my own family, but that night, I had managed to become invisible even to strangers. The gift I brought my mother had taken weeks to put together. A custom photo album, leather-bound, filled with scanned images from her childhood, college days, her early years of motherhood. I'd gone through boxes in the attic, cleaned old negatives, restored faded prints, arranged them in a narrative she could hold in her hands page by page. It was wrapped in gold paper with a silk ribbon, placed on the gift table early in the evening with a small card, just my name on it in my handwriting. She never opened it. At least not while I was there. She opened others. Candles, scarves, a pearl necklace from my father, even a decorative spoon set from a woman she barely knew from her yoga class. Each time she offered smiles, kisses, thank yous. But my gift sat untouched among the pile, quietly pushed to the side, like it didn't belong, like I didn't belong. I watched her eyes slide past it more than once, her hands grazing other packages but never mine. By the time my father stood up, cleared his throat, and delivered the ultimatum that shattered what little was left of my dignity, the ground beneath me had already begun to crack. His voice, stern and loud, announcing that I owed them money, $2,200 for living under their roof, felt like a death knell. And when he followed it up with the cruel suggestion that I leave and not come back if I couldn't pay, I realized something with terrifying clarity. They didn't see me. Not as a daughter. Not as family. Not even as a full person. Derek's smirk from across the room only solidified that truth. His mocking glance a confirmation of everything I had refused to believe for years. I had never been seen as someone worth protecting, worth loving, worth keeping close. I was useful. I was dependable. I was background noise. That moment, standing beside the swinging door, surrounded by 30 people who looked everywhere but at me, was the end of a long, painful illusion. I had believed, even through years of coldness and neglect, that if I tried harder, gave more, proved my worth through actions and achievements, I would eventually earn a seat at the table, real recognition, real belonging. But I was never supposed to be seated there in the first place. I wasn't part of the picture they saw when they thought of family. And so I stood. Quietly. Deliberately. Without a scene, without a final word, without so much as a goodbye. I left the room I had decorated, the dinner I had designed, the celebration I had made possible. And not a single person followed me. 2 days after the party, I made the final move. It didn't feel rushed or chaotic. It was quiet, methodical, and entirely mine. I had been preparing for this moment long before anyone noticed. Over the past few months, I had slowly, carefully taken my things out of the house without drawing attention. Books tucked into tote bags, seasonal clothes packed and moved under the guise of weekend trips. Small kitchen items slipped into my car in the early mornings or late at night when no one was around to ask questions. I had rehearsed every step in my mind 100 times, making sure that when the time came, there would be nothing left to return for. That final night, after walking out of the celebration that turned into my public humiliation, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I drove straight to the house I had bought in silence and opened the door to a place that had no trace of their voices, no scent of their disapproval, no furniture rearranged behind my back, no comments about how much space I was taking up. Just walls that waited patiently, rooms that echoed only with the sounds I chose to make. The last box, heavy and worn at the corners, held the remaining pieces of what I once believed was home. A few framed photos I hadn't thrown away yet, a stack of journals, a mug my mother had given me when I was 12, one of the rare moments I thought maybe she saw me, though now I wasn't so sure. I carried it from the car to the hallway of my new house, closed the door behind me, and placed the box down next to the others stacked neatly in the living room. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the key to the old house, the one I had carried on my ring since high school. I stared at it for a long moment, small, cold, familiar, before placing it on the table near the entrance, where it would stay behind when I left. There was no note. No explanation. No goodbye. Just that single silent gesture, laying the key down as if to say without words I'm done. I didn't rush to unpack. I didn't feel the need to organize anything right away. The chaos of unopened boxes around me felt oddly comforting, like a reminder that this chapter was still being written and I could shape it however I wanted. I moved to the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the floor back against the wall, knees pulled up under my sweater. The air was cool but still untouched, like it had been waiting for someone to simply breathe in it. And I did. I breathed in silence that didn't sting. A silence that felt like balm on an old wound. No footsteps overhead, no doors slamming, no muffled voices arguing down the hall, no glances heavy with judgment. Just my own breath, steady and unhurried, the soft clink of my spoon against ceramic, the distant sound of wind brushing against the windows. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't being watched. I wasn't being measured. I wasn't being asked to shrink or translate myself into something easier to accept. I didn't need to smile out of politeness or stay quiet out of fear. I just sat, surrounded by cardboard and dust and morning light, and let the stillness wrap around me like a blanket. That kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't punish, doesn't accuse, doesn't demand, is rare. It doesn't shout its value, but you feel it in your bones when it's finally yours. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about whether anyone had called or texted. I didn't feel the usual dread or the impulse to explain myself. I had nothing left to explain. I had made my decision not in rage or desperation but in clarity. Everything leading up to that moment, the indifference, the dismissal, the cruelty disguised as tradition, had chipped away at something in me for so long that when it finally broke, I didn't shatter. I simply stepped away from the rubble and walked into something better. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with the curtains still open, the soft orange glow of the street lamp pouring in, casting shadows across the boxes and half-unpacked bags. There were no dreams, no interruptions, just the steady rhythm of my breath in a room that didn't expect me to be anything but myself. And when I woke up with sunlight stretching across the wooden floors, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I had arrived. It hit me unexpectedly, like a slap I didn't see coming. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, still surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, sipping coffee and trying to create some kind of morning ritual for myself, when the bank notification popped up on my phone. It was short and cold. $500 withdrawn from a shared checking account I had forgotten still existed. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of error, a delayed charge, maybe even fraud. I hadn't touched that account in months, and I certainly hadn't approved any withdrawals. I tapped into the banking app, heart beginning to tighten, and saw the transaction listed as a debit at an ATM located not far from my parents' neighborhood. A few hours later, another notification appeared. $300 gone, this time at a gas station I'd never been to. Panic mixed with confusion, and then something deeper, something familiar began to rise in my chest. That slow, choking realization that this wasn't new. That maybe, just maybe, this had been happening all along. I opened the account history, scrolling past the most recent activity, eyes catching on details I had never paid close enough attention to before. There were small purchases at first. $18 here, $26 there. Coffee shops I didn't frequent, gas stations nowhere near my route to work, odd charges at sporting goods stores, even some transactions labeled as miscellaneous services. I clicked further back, page after page, month after month, and my stomach began to twist into knots. There were restaurant bills on nights I had eaten at home, streaming subscriptions I never signed up for, clothing stores I never stepped into. Some weeks showed daily withdrawals in round numbers, $60, $80, $100, always from the same 2 or 3 ATMs, always clustered around the part of town I had tried to erase from my memory. A pattern emerged, clear as day once I stopped trying to rationalize it. It was them. It had always been them. My father and Derek had access to that account years ago, back when they insisted we set up a family emergency fund. I had trusted them. I was working steadily, managing most of the household bills, and they claimed it would make things easier to track expenses together. I remember the conversation vividly, my father explaining how it would be temporary, how I could help out just a little, how Derek needed a chance to get back on his feet. I had been so naive, so desperate to be useful, so hopeful that doing the right thing would finally earn me some respect. I agreed. I signed the forms. I linked the account to my direct deposit. And then I forgot about it, or rather, I stopped looking too closely because every time I asked questions, they waved me off with vague reassurances or irritation. Now, every missing dollar screamed at me through the screen. They had been using me. Not just emotionally, not just for convenience, but financially. For years. And I hadn't even noticed. The worst part wasn't the money itself, though that loss was substantial. It was the betrayal. The theft. The cold, calculated way they had tapped into something that was mine and drained it slowly, carefully, as if I would never notice, as if they assumed I never would. Because in their eyes, I had always been the one who would stay quiet, the one who wouldn't question, the one who would just keep giving. I sat frozen, phone still in my hand, while the room around me fell completely still. The humming of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the settling floorboards, the soft tap of rain against the window, all of it faded beneath the sharp roar of realization in my head. They hadn't just used my account. They had stolen from me systematically and without shame. And they had done it knowing I trusted them, knowing I believed I was helping. That I thought we were still some version of a family. I pulled up my old bank statements, Printed copies I had kept in a file folder because I'd always been meticulous with documents, even when I didn't know why. I compared them side by side with newer digital records, highlighting every unexplained charge, every location I had never visited, every suspicious withdrawal that lined up with times I knew I hadn't been near an ATM. The deeper I went, the more the anger swelled, not hot and wild but quiet, steady, cold. The kind of anger that doesn't make you scream but sharpens you, makes you precise. I tallied the totals, running figures in a spreadsheet I built from scratch. Over $9,000. That's how much had been taken from me, little by little, hidden beneath the surface of daily life. Some of it was clearly Derek. Purchases at sporting goods stores he used to frequent, music gear he never paid for. Some of it was unmistakably my father. Withdrawals that aligned with his odd cash-only habits, strange fees from online services he never explained. And none of it had been discussed. None of it asked for. They didn't just dip into my account, they treated it like theirs. And all the while they looked me in the eyes, shared dinners with me, accepted my help, asked me to cover bills, planned holidays like nothing was wrong. They smiled at me even as they siphoned away my stability. And when they no longer needed me, when I became inconvenient, when I dared to live for myself, they turned on me. Publicly. Ruthlessly. It wasn't just disrespect. It was calculated disregard. And now I had the proof. A few days after uncovering the smaller transactions, when I thought I had already seen the worst of it, I came across something that made my blood run cold. I was going through more of my financial documents, this time digging into my credit reports, pulling files from all 3 bureaus, cross-referencing every account, every balance, every inquiry. I wasn't expecting anything major. I thought I'd already peeled back the final layer of their deceit. But there it was. A $50,000 personal loan taken out in my name. Not a credit card, not a small line of credit, but a full loan, active with monthly payments and accumulated interest. The account had been opened almost a year ago. I sat in silence, reading the details over and over, heart pounding in my ears. My name was listed at the top. Melissa Carter. My social security number. My address from back when I still lived at the family home. Everything matched. But I had never taken out that loan. I had never even spoken to that bank. At first, I convinced myself it had to be a mistake. A clerical error, a crossed wire, someone else with the same name. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was no mistake. It was deliberate. The loan had been issued through a bank we had all used before, and the contact information had been a mixture of mine and someone else's. The email was an old family account we once shared, one I hadn't checked in years. The phone number wasn't mine anymore. But the debt was. And legally it was mine to carry. I called the bank immediately. My voice shook as I gave my details, my account number, my social security number, repeating the words slowly, trying not to sound panicked. "Yes, Ms. Carter," the representative said calmly after a moment, as if she were confirming a dinner reservation. "You're listed as the primary borrower on that loan." I stared at the floor, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. I asked for a copy of the original application. She sent it over within minutes. I opened the document and felt my stomach drop. The signature at the bottom, my name spelled exactly right, wasn't mine. It looked similar, familiar even, but the strokes were off. My real signature had a subtle tilt, a small curl in them, that I had never been able to break. This one was too clean, too flat. Forged. And whoever had done it had known exactly what they were doing. The application had my social security number, my date of birth, my employment information. All of it correct. All of it stolen. I scanned through the application history and found that the first payment had been missed 2 months prior. That meant I was already behind on a loan I didn't know existed. My credit score was already taking damage. And I was legally on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars that I had never seen, never used, never agreed to. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I just sat there, reading and rereading the digital paperwork, letting the realization sink in like ice into my bones. They hadn't just stolen from me in small, hidden ways. They had committed full-blown identity fraud. They had taken my name, my financial credibility, my future, and tied it to a debt so large it could have ruined everything I had been building. I didn't need to ask who did it. There were only 2 people who had ever had access to all that information. My father and my brother. They had my documents. They had been inside my room. They had helped me set up accounts years ago. My father had once insisted on keeping a copy of my social security card, just in case. And I had agreed without hesitation. Of course I had. I was raised to believe that trust was part of family. That protecting each other meant sharing everything. Now I saw what that trust had been worth to them. I printed every document. I called the fraud department. I filed the reports. I submitted a police report. I began the process of getting legal representation. I opened new accounts, placed freezes on my credit files, and flagged the fraudulent loan for investigation. Every step was methodical. Every phone call was clinical. There was no more room for emotion. I had moved beyond shock, beyond betrayal. I was operating now from a place of survival. That night, after everything had been submitted, scanned, verified, and filed, I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper and legal notes, my laptop still glowing in the dim light. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time I didn't find comfort in the silence. I felt something deeper, grief maybe, not just for the money or the name they had stolen, but for the reality that I had lost any illusion of who they were. They had used me as a financial foundation, and the moment I tried to stand on my own, they punished me for it. They hadn't just taken advantage of my trust. They had preyed on it. Systematically. Without remorse. That night I made the final decision. Everything shared, every thread of connection, every joint account, every document, every open pathway they could still exploit. It all had to go. I closed accounts. I changed numbers. I wiped access. I scrubbed their fingerprints from my life, not just legally but emotionally. They had stolen $50,000 in my name. But what they truly took was any trace of doubt I had left. Once the full weight of what had been done to me settled into something sharp and clear, I knew what had to happen next. There could be no halfway measures, no slow unraveling, no trace left behind for them to pull on when it suited them. I had spent years tethered to a house, to people, to responsibilities that were never mine to carry, all under the illusion of family. But illusions don't pay back loans or return stolen time, and they certainly don't protect you when the people behind them are willing to use your name like currency. I made a list, sat down at my kitchen counter, and began calling every company that still had my name on file. Electricity, water, gas, internet, homeowners insurance, car insurance, the old cell phone family plan, the garbage service, the security system, everything. Each call was a small act of defiance, a quiet but deliberate untangling of myself from a web I hadn't fully realized I was caught in. I explained again and again that I was no longer living at that address, that I was removing myself from the account, that I wanted written confirmation sent to my new home, that they should not allow anyone to use my name or social security number for any reason. Some of the representatives on the other end sounded confused, others curious. One even said, "Are you sure you want to do this all at once?" I was sure. I had never been more sure of anything. I closed old accounts and opened new ones under my own name, linked to my new address, locked down with fresh passwords, stronger verification, and layers of digital protection that no one in my former household would be able to guess. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming every piece of autonomy they had chipped away at, utilities I had paid for but never controlled, bills that had my name but none of my benefit, services they used while I received the invoices, and the blame. I had been the silent financial backbone of that household, the fallback, the emergency fund, the one who took care of things, because no one else would. Or more honestly, because they knew I would and that I wouldn't make a scene. But the scene had already happened. They had made it, not me. So when the internet finally shut off at the house, one of the last things I had removed myself from, I expected a reaction. And it came just a few hours later in the form of a text from Derek. Not a call, not a question, not an apology. Just a short, blunt message. Wi-Fi's down. Fix it. No greeting. No context. No acknowledgement of what had transpired over the past week. No mention of the stolen funds, the fake loan, the account closures, or even the fact that I had walked out of a party they used to humiliate me. Just a command. As if I were still the same person who would drop everything to solve a problem they created, still the one who'd scramble to make things work so he didn't have to lift a finger. I stared at the message for a few seconds, not angry, not surprised. And then I replied, "That's not my problem anymore." 6 words. Simple. Clean. Final. I turned my phone face down and didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't part of their machine. I wasn't the fixer, the administrator, the emotional accountant, or the silent supporter standing off to the side while they lived freely off my labor. I sat in my new living room surrounded by open windows and soft light, and I realized what that moment truly meant. It wasn't about a disconnected Wi-Fi router or a sarcastic text from my brother. It was about freedom. Real freedom. The kind that comes not with fanfare or loud declarations, but with firm boundaries and quiet resolve. The kind that settles deep in your chest and lets you breathe fully, without fear that someone is waiting to take advantage of your kindness again. No more shared accounts. No more shared burdens. No more access. No more manipulation masked as family duty. I wasn't theirs to use anymore. I was mine. I spent an entire weekend gathering every trace of evidence I could find, my laptop open across the kitchen table, surrounded by printed bank statements, annotated spreadsheets, and legal templates. Every transaction that wasn't mine, every withdrawal I hadn't authorized, every monthly charge from accounts I never opened, I screenshotted them all. I cross-checked timestamps, locations and amounts, organizing them chronologically, each file renamed and dated with precision. I included screenshots from the banking apps, highlighted suspicious charges, and noted down every communication with customer service, every call log, every email confirmation. I made sure there were no gaps, no unanswered questions. If I was going to confront this, I was going to do it fully armed. By the time I finished, I had over 100 pages of documentation saved into a digital folder and printed into a hard copy binder, tabbed and indexed. I brought it to my lawyer, someone I had trusted long before any of this began, a friend who had walked beside me through smaller storms, and who now looked at the growing mess with a hard, focused calm. She flipped through the binder silently, page after page, then looked up at me and said, "You have a case." There was no hesitation in her voice. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. We drafted the letter that same afternoon. It was direct, professional, legally sound, and left no room for misunderstanding. It explained in detail that I had gathered extensive evidence of financial misuse, fraudulent activity and identity theft tied to both my father and my brother. It included a demand to cease and desist all unauthorized use of my financial information and property. It stated clearly that any further unauthorized transaction would result in immediate legal action, both civil and potentially criminal. The tone wasn't emotional. It wasn't a plea. It was a boundary drawn in ink and law. I sent it via certified mail and email, ensuring there would be no way for them to claim they hadn't received it. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew it would come one way or another. And it did. Not through an apology, not through a private message, not even through a denial. It came through a public post less than 24 hours later. Dirk. He posted on his social media account, a public one with hundreds of friends, family and acquaintances watching, a long, unhinged rant. He didn't use my name directly, but anyone who knew us understood exactly who he meant. He called me selfish, accused me of betrayal, of turning my back on the family that raised me. He claimed I had always been cold, that I owed everything to our parents, that I was tearing the family apart over money. He mocked my independence, sneered at my boundaries, twisted every sacrifice I had ever made into a punchline. He called me ungrateful, vindictive, unstable. I read it once. Then again. I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I didn't call him or ask why. I took a screenshot. Multiple actually. Every line, every comment, every like, every timestamp. I saved it all, organized it into the same binder, filed under a new tab, retaliation and harassment. It wasn't just slander. It was proof. Proof that the moment I asserted myself, the moment I said enough, he lashed out in the only way he knew how. Publicly, performatively, shamelessly. He wanted to discredit me before I could speak. He wanted to frame my resistance as an attack. He wanted to shame me back into silence. But I wasn't that version of myself anymore. That post didn't scare me. It clarified everything. They weren't going to stop because they felt guilt or shame or because I asked nicely. They were only going to stop when they were forced to. And I was ready. A few days after Derek's public outburst, I was sitting in my living room, sorting through paperwork for the upcoming legal steps, when I heard a knock at the door. It was soft but deliberate. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I hesitated, unsure whether I wanted to open it at all. But something made me go. When I pulled the door open, there stood Aunt Nancy, holding a thick manila envelope in her hands, her expression tight and unreadable, eyes more tired than I remembered. We hadn't spoken much over the past few years. She was always polite, always a bit distant, one of the few family members who didn't go out of her way to make me feel small. But she never interfered either. I assumed she had picked her side a long time ago, or at the very least, decided it was safer not to pick at all. But that day she looked different. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't hug me. She just held the envelope out and said quietly, "You need to see this. They were hiding it from you." I let her in wordlessly, and she followed me into the living room where the binder of evidence still lay open on the table. She sat across from me and placed the envelope between us like it was a wound. I opened it slowly, and the first thing I pulled out was a letter, on thick cream-colored stationery, official letterhead, dated almost a year ago. It was a job offer. Not just a job, an actual career-changing position at one of the top data firms in the region. Senior data analyst, competitive salary, full benefits, relocation assistance and signing bonus. My heart sank as I read it. I remembered applying. I remembered the first interview, the second, then silence. I had assumed I hadn't made the final cut. There had been no email, no rejection, no follow-up. Nothing. And now I was holding the offer letter in my hands, addressed to me but clearly never delivered. I looked at the bottom corner. It had been mailed to my parents' house. That was during a time when I still lived there, but they always insisted on handling the mail, so it wouldn't get lost. I trusted them with that too. There was a second sheet. A printout of an email chain. My name had been used to respond. Someone had written pretending to be me declining the offer. I read the words 3 times to be sure. Thank you for the opportunity, but I have decided to pursue a different path. I'm not interested at this time. It was clean, polite, final. But I never wrote that. I looked up at Nancy, completely numb. How did you get this? She hesitated, then said, they weren't careful. I overheard Derek bragging about how he and your father made sure you didn't waste your time chasing something that would have made you move too far away. He laughed. Said you wouldn't have lasted anyway. Her mouth twisted with disgust. It didn't sit right with me. I started looking through old files they left at your grandmother's house. That's where I found the letter. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat had closed around something hard and burning. Nancy reached back into her bag and handed me another envelope, this one much thinner. And this, she said, was in the safe deposit box with your grandmother's will. You were supposed to know about this years ago. It was a copy of a legal document. An amendment to my grandmother's estate plan. A trust set aside specifically for me. Not Derek. Not the rest of the family. Me. The document detailed a financial trust in my name, with strict conditions attached. It could only be accessed when I turned 25 or if certain milestones were met. College graduation, job milestones, housing independence. All of which I had already reached long ago. But no one had ever told me. No one had mentioned the trust or the fund, or the fact that my grandmother had quietly tried to ensure I had something to protect me. Something that was mine. Nancy said nothing for a while. Neither did I. I sat holding both pieces of paper, one in each hand, proof of an opportunity stolen and a legacy buried. I thought about the years I spent wondering why things never worked out, why certain doors closed so abruptly, why no one seemed to believe in my potential, even when I gave them every reason to. And here it was. They hadn't just undermined me emotionally. They had actively intervened in my life to keep me dependent, quiet, manageable. They made decisions behind my back. They silenced opportunities. They withheld things that were mine by right. I felt the shame, the grief, the outrage swirl together into something sharp. But underneath it all, what surprised me most was the clarity. The relief of finally understanding why so much had felt wrong for so long. I wasn't imagining the sabotage. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. Nancy stayed for a little while longer, not saying much. Before she left, she touched my shoulder lightly and said, I should have come to you sooner. I'm sorry. But I'm here now. If you need anything, you call me. And then she was gone. I sat alone again, now with 2 more pieces of the puzzle in my lap, but for once I didn't feel powerless. I felt like the truth had finally started to come home. Ms. Harper sat across from me in her office, a thick stack of files between us, her expression calm but absolutely firm as she flipped through page after page of the documents I had provided. Screenshots, financial statements, forged signatures, email threads, public defamation, and now, thanks to Aunt Nancy, the intercepted job offer and the hidden trust fund. She didn't need time to deliberate. She didn't hedge or offer cautious optimism. She looked me in the eye and said, You have a rock-solid case, Melissa. Fraud. Forgery. Financial abuse. Identity theft. This isn't just morally wrong. It's criminal. It felt strange to hear those words spoken so plainly, without doubt or hesitation. For years I had internalized the harm, minimized it, rewritten it in softer tones just to keep functioning. But now it was being named, documented, validated by someone who knew the law and wasn't emotionally entangled in the web I had just escaped. And she wasn't just offering sympathy, she was preparing action. We worked late that evening drafting a formal cease and desist order, laying out every violation clearly, attached with dates, documents, and references. It was structured, sharp, and legally binding. The language left no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, they were to terminate all forms of contact. No texts, no phone calls, no third-party messages, no appearances at my home or workplace. Any attempt to use my name, social security number, or previous financial authorizations would be documented as further evidence and reported to the proper authorities. The letter also included a formal demand to relinquish any property, mail, or digital accounts still tied to me in any way. Ms. Harper made sure it was delivered through certified mail with confirmation of receipt, and a digital copy was emailed to both my father's and Derek's last known addresses. Within hours, both messages were confirmed as received. It was done. The door was closed. This time permanently and with law behind it. The same week, the final piece of paperwork regarding my grandmother's trust was processed. I had held my breath during every step, half expecting some new obstacle to appear, some hidden clause that would delay the process again or let someone else interfere. But nothing came. No pushback, no challenge. For once, something that had been meant for me actually reached me. I sat in my kitchen holding the formal letter from the bank that confirmed the disbursement. $15,000 released from the trust, tax-free, legally mine, untouched by anyone else. It wasn't just the money itself, though that amount meant security, breathing room, a way to move forward with full independence. It was what it represented. Something in my life that hadn't been stolen, twisted, intercepted, or rewritten by someone else's agenda. My grandmother had trusted me. She had left something behind with my name on it, and even though others had tried to hide it, it still made its way back to me. I transferred the funds to my new account, the one that only I had access to, and set aside a portion of it for legal fees, another for future savings, and the rest for whatever I wanted. Something I hadn't allowed myself to even think about in years. Not obligations, not emergencies, not shared bills. Just space. Just freedom. When the silence settled around me that night, it wasn't the tense quiet of waiting for the next blow. It was the stillness of safety. There were no more surprise withdrawals. No more vague excuses. No more guilt-tripping voicemails or accusations disguised as concern. There were no more shared accounts. No more blurred boundaries. No more of them in my pockets, my inbox, my future. Everything they had taken from me, time, energy, trust, money, opportunity, I could never get all of it back. But I had enough now to stand, to move, to protect what was left. I had my name, my power, and a legal wall they could no longer climb. And I had the certainty that this time I wouldn't be silent. I stood in front of the house I had once called home, the same front steps I had climbed for over 2 decades, and for a moment I felt nothing. Not nostalgia. Not fear. Not regret. Just a calm, steady readiness. I had come not for revenge, not for drama, not for closure in the romantic sense, but to deliver the truth directly, without mediation, without emails, without excuses. To look them in the eye one last time and make the boundary real in a way paper alone never could. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The door was unlocked just as it always had been, but it felt different now. Less like a door and more like the final checkpoint I had to pass through before I could fully leave this version of my life behind. They were all there. My mother in her usual seat at the end of the dining table, staring down at a magazine that was now just a prop. My father standing stiff near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, jaw clenched as if bracing for a storm he couldn't control. And Derek, sprawled in the armchair like he didn't have a care in the world, a faint, familiar smirk already forming as he noticed the binder in my hands. I walked past them without speaking and placed the thick folder on the center of the dining table. The cover was labeled clearly in bold, documented evidence. I opened it slowly, letting the weight of each page speak louder than any insult they could muster. Bank statements, screenshots of forged signatures, digital records of intercepted communications, a copy of the cease and desist letter, the trust fund documentation, the job offer email with the fake response. All of it neatly arranged, tabbed, and irrefutable. My voice didn't shake when I spoke. "This," I said, looking straight at my father, "is everything. Every lie. Every theft. Every time you used my name, my account, my trust." I turned to Derek. "Every transaction you made without permission. Every document you tampered with. Every opportunity you threw away for me because you couldn't stand the thought of me standing on my own." I let the silence sit. My mother didn't look up. Her fingers were still curled around the edge of the magazine, her eyes downcast, her mouth pressed into a thin, unreadable line. She said nothing. Not one word. Not even a whisper of protest or defense. My father flushed deep red, but he didn't move. His mouth opened like he wanted to respond, but no words came. His silence wasn't confusion, it was guilt. The kind that had nowhere left to hide. He looked down at the binder like it was something poisonous, something that had finally turned on him. And Derek had the nerve to laugh. A short, low chuckle that didn't even try to mask its condescension. "All this because you got your feelings hurt?" he said. "You're really going to ruin the family over a few dollars and some old emails?" I stared at him for a long second, then said calmly and clearly, "If any of you touch my life again, my finances, my name, my peace, you'll be hearing from my lawyer in a courtroom." The smile faded, but the defiance in his eyes remained. He wasn't used to consequences. He wasn't used to being told no. But I wasn't here for him. I wasn't here to explain myself or prove my pain. I was here to end something. Officially. Without tears. Without begging. I picked up the binder, closed it, and held it at my side. Then I turned to all three of them, my mother still silent and unmoved, my father shrinking into his own guilt, and Derek still clinging to a power he no longer had, and I said, "I already live without you. And I'm doing just fine." No one followed me. No one asked me to stay. No one tried to stop me. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cool evening air. And when I closed that door behind me, I did it without a single glance back. It didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like freedom. 3 weeks after I walked out of that house for the final time, I unlocked the door to my own office. A small, sunlit space on the second floor of a quiet building just outside Providence. The windows overlooked the street and the floors creaked when I walked across them, but to me it felt like standing inside something sacred. The walls were still bare, the furniture minimal, just a few desks, chairs, a whiteboard, but I saw the beginning of something real, something built with purpose and dignity, something no one could take from me. I named it Rise Free. The name came to me late one night, scribbled in the corner of a notebook after I had spent hours going over what I wanted this to be. Not just a response to what I had lived through, but a platform that would exist for the women who hadn't yet escaped, who were still entangled in families or relationships that used love as a disguise for control. I knew how it felt to be trapped by silence, to give and give until you no longer recognized where your life ended and someone else's grip began. I knew the subtle ways financial control could strip a person of their choices. I had lived it, breathed it, survived it. And now I wanted to use every piece of what I had learned to help others do the same. Only faster, safer, without having to walk through fire alone. With the first disbursement from my grandmother's trust, I registered Rise Free as a nonprofit organization. I hired a small team, a legal advisor, a financial consultant, 2 part-time counselors, and a program coordinator. My lawyer, Ms. Harper, agreed to be an external legal partner, offering consultations and support to those who came to us completely unaware of their rights, their power, their legal options. I reached out to community spaces, shelters, and advocacy groups, building bridges, asking questions, inviting collaboration. I wasn't trying to rescue anyone. I wanted to equip, to educate, to empower. We began hosting our first seminars within weeks. Small gatherings of 5 to 10 women at a time, most of them nervous, many still living under someone's financial thumb. We discussed financial literacy, personal banking, digital security, legal protections, how to read contracts, how to detect manipulation hidden behind words like help or protection. We created handouts, resource lists, one-on-one planning sessions. We brought in speakers, lawyers, trauma therapists, survivors, who could put names to the invisible wounds so many of these women carried. Some came in whispering. Some cried during intake. Some didn't speak at all for the first hour. But little by little something shifted. Eyes met mine with a flicker of recognition. Shoulders straightened. Words like, finally, I thought it was just me, and I didn't know I was allowed to leave became common refrains. And every time I sat with them, fully present, offering not just knowledge but proof. Proof that they weren't broken. That they weren't weak. That survival didn't have to mean staying quiet. We built a small emergency fund for urgent needs. Hotel rooms, new phones, transportation. We partnered with a clinic to provide low-cost therapy for women rebuilding from emotional and financial abuse. We worked case by case, slowly but deliberately, following up, checking in, staying close. I furnished the office slowly. One shelf was dedicated to donated books, on law, healing, trauma, finance, memoirs. The walls soon held framed affirmations written by our clients, one of which read, "My name is mine. My life is mine." Another read, "I left and the sky didn't fall. It opened." There were still moments I had to catch my breath. Moments when exhaustion threatened to spill over, when I remembered everything I had lost, everything I had missed because someone else decided they knew better how I should live. But those moments passed quickly now. They were no longer defining. They were reminders. Markers of where I had been and how far I had come. When I sat at my desk in my office, in the organization I had built from a legacy meant for me, I felt none of the doubt that once weighed me down. I felt clarity. I felt strength. I felt direction. Rise Free wasn't just an organization. It was the life I had built with my own hands, on my own terms, from the ashes of everything they tried to erase. And it was only the beginning. I heard through quiet channels, distant relatives, a neighbor who still spoke to my aunt, someone who used to work with my father, that they had lost the house. The one I had grown up in, the one where every corner held the ghost of a memory, both warm and wounding, was gone. Foreclosure. They had defaulted on their mortgage after months of missed payments, and the bank had finally moved in. They were forced out with little notice, no safety net, no one left to cover their debt, no daughter left to quietly sacrifice her own life to bail them out. Now they live in a small rented apartment on the edge of town. 2 rooms, no yard, no space for the pride they once wore like armor. It's not the house that breaks them, I imagine, but the loss of control. The loss of an audience. The knowledge that the narrative they had built around themselves, respectable parents, dignified, deserving, had cracked wide open, and that the truth had seeped into every corner of their lives. Derek too is no longer loud. His social media accounts have gone completely silent. No new photos, no smug captions, no taunts disguised as jokes. Just emptiness where once there was arrogance. Word reached me that the bank initiated an internal investigation after receiving my formal report and documentation. The evidence I had provided, his transactions, the forged signatures, the digital trail he left in his carelessness, was enough to trigger a full inquiry. I don't know how far the investigation has gone or whether he will face charges, but I know what silence means from someone like him. It means the walls are closing in. It means the smirk has finally been wiped away. And yet, even now, I don't celebrate their collapse. I don't feel joy at their loss. What I feel is space. Clean, open, peaceful space. For the first time in my life, I am not burdened by their weight. I don't wake up calculating how to protect them, fix them, make excuses for them. I don't shrink myself to avoid their judgment or exhaust myself proving I'm worth basic respect. I no longer belong to their version of the story. I am no longer the background, the afterthought, the quiet shadow who smiles and nods and pays the bills while being told to stay small. I am a woman who stood in the middle of wreckage and decided not to rebuild the same walls that caged her. I chose myself. I chose to fight, to protect, to expose, to rebuild. Not for them, but for me. I chose clarity over comfort, truth over tradition, freedom over illusion. And in doing so, I found strength I didn't know I had. Now I walk through life differently. With my name intact. With my finances protected. With a purpose that belongs only to me. I run an organization that gives other women the tools I never had, and every single day I hear versions of my own story reflected back to me. Voices rising from places of silence, hands reaching for the edge of something better. And I know that this is what power looks like. Not cruelty, not revenge, but the decision to step forward when you were expected to stay behind. Their fall wasn't my doing. Their choices were. My freedom was mine. And I will never give it back.